Picture this: a crowded coffee shop, the hum of conversation, the clatter of cups, and then chaos. A spilled drink, raised voices, frustration bubbling over. Everyone's reacting, flustered, except for one person, him. He doesn't tense up, he doesn't mirror the panic. He's calm, steady, almost unshakable. And in that moment, something fascinating happens. She notices not just his composure, but the quiet strength behind it. That's the power of Stoicism in action, the kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but effortlessly commands respect. And here's the thing: women are biologically and psychologically wired to pick up on these traits, even if they can't quite put their finger on why. There's a reason Stoic men stand out. It's not about being emotionless or cold. It's the opposite. It's about mastery over reactions, over circumstances, over the noise of the world. And when a man embodies that, it's magnetic. Women aren't just noticing, they're responding on a deeper level, drawn to the stability, the certainty, the unspoken confidence that says, "I've got this." Think about it. In a world where so many people are ruled by their emotions, where drama is the default, a man who remains grounded becomes a rarity, a silent force that feels like a breath of fresh air. So what exactly are these traits? What is it about Stoicism that resonates so powerfully? Over the next 25 points, we'll break down the qualities that make a Stoic man irresistible, not because he's trying to be, but because he simply is. From the way he handles adversity to the quiet assurance in his body language, these are the signals women unconsciously admire, the kind of traits that build attraction without a single word being spoken. This isn't about playing games or putting on an act. It's about cultivating a mindset that naturally draws people in, especially women who are hardwired to value these qualities in a partner. Ready to dive in? Let's explore what makes Stoicism so quietly powerful and why it matters more than you might think. The first trait that makes a Stoic man impossible to ignore. Emotional control, not the stiff, robotic kind, but the kind that radiates quiet authority. Picture two men in the same situation. One gets cut off in traffic and instantly slams his horn, face flushing, grip tightening on the wheel. The other, a slow breath, a slight shake of the head, then moving on like it never happened. Who would you trust more in a crisis? Who would you respect more? That's the power of composure. Women notice this instantly because on a primal level, it signals reliability. Here's why it matters. Thousands of years ago, survival depended on alliances with people who could keep their cool, tribesmen who wouldn't panic when food ran low or predators approached. That evolutionary wiring hasn't disappeared. When a man today handles criticism without crumbling or deflects provocation with a smirk instead of a snarl, it triggers an unconscious recognition. This is someone who can handle life's storms. And for women, that's not just attractive, it's safe. But here's where most men misunderstand Stoicism. It's not about suppressing emotions, it's about mastering them. Think of it like a martial art for the mind. When someone insults him, the Stoic doesn't feel less, he chooses more. Maybe he laughs it off, maybe he walks away, but he never lets someone else's chaos dictate his own. That's the kind of emotional control that doesn't just impress women, it draws them in. Because in a world full of men who wear their emotions like billboards, the one who stays steady becomes undeniable. And the most compelling part, this isn't something you fake. Women have an almost eerie ability to detect forced calm. Real composure comes from practice, from learning to pause instead of react, to question impulses instead of obeying them. It's the difference between a man who says he's unshakable and one who proves it when the pressure's on. So the next time you feel that surge of frustration or embarrassment, remember, how you handle it isn't just about you. It's about who's watching, and trust me, she always is. There's something unmistakable about a man who moves through the world with intention. Not the kind of ambition that screams for attention, but the quiet, steady kind, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what matters and why. This is the second trait women instinctively recognize in a Stoic man: purpose-driven focus. Imagine two men at a party. One is loud, cracking jokes, basking in every glance his way. The other, he's engaged but not desperate. He listens more than he talks. He's not there to be seen. He's there because he chose to be. And here's the catch: women aren't just observing his behavior. They're sensing something deeper. A man who isn't chasing validation is a man who's already whole, and that is magnetic. The Stoics called this radiate, the pursuit of excellence for its own sake. Not for applause, not for status, but because striving to be better is simply who you are. In ancient Rome, this wasn't about climbing social ladders. It was about mastering your craft, your character, your duty. Fast forward to today, and the principle hasn't changed. Women notice when a man's drive isn't tied to external rewards. It's the difference between the guy who works out to post mirror selfies and the one who trains because he respects his body. Between the entrepreneur obsessed with his net worth and the one consumed by the problem he's solving. One reeks of neediness, the other radiates integrity. But here's where Stoicism flips the script on modern ambition. Most people think purpose is about achieving, rack up accomplishments, collect trophies, prove your worth. The Stoic knows it's about aligning. It's not the goal itself that matters, but the why behind it. A woman can tell when a man's mission is authentic. Maybe it's the way he talks about his work, not with bravado but with quiet conviction, or how he handles setbacks, not as failures but as feedback. That's the hallmark of a purpose-driven man. His focus isn't fragile. It doesn't shatter when things go wrong because his worth isn't tied to the outcome. And this is where attraction thrives. Biology isn't subtle here. Women are drawn to men who exhibit direction because historically direction meant survival. A tribe led by men with clear purpose ate better, fought smarter, endured longer. Today, the stakes are different, but the wiring remains. When a woman sees a man relentlessly pursuing growth, not for clout but for the sake of growth itself, it signals something primal. This is someone who builds, who provides, who persists. Not just in grand gestures, but in the daily grind. The way he reads instead of mindlessly scrolling, how he invests in skills rather than distractions. Even the way he chooses friends, not for convenience but for character. The irony: the more a man chases purpose for himself, the more others, especially women, are drawn to him. Not because he's trying to impress, but because he's too busy building to notice who's watching. That's the Stoic secret. Excellence isn't a performance, it's a practice. And when a man lives that way, women don't just notice, they lean in. The third trait that sets Stoic men apart might surprise you. It's not about what they say, but how they listen. Real listening, the kind that doesn't scramble to reply or react, but simply absorbs. Think about the last time someone truly heard you. Not just nodded while waiting for their turn to speak, but gave you their full attention without interrupting, without twisting your words into a debate. That's non-reactive listening, and it's rarer than you'd think. Women notice this immediately because in a world of fractured attention and performative conversations, being genuinely heard feels like being handed a gift. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in his Meditations, how withholding judgment creates space for understanding. He wasn't talking about relationships, but the principle applies perfectly. When a man listens without jumping to correct or defend, without letting his ego hijack the conversation, something remarkable happens. She feels safe. Not just appreciated, but respected. There's a reason defensive listening is such a common complaint in relationships. Most people don't listen to understand, they listen to respond. The Stoic does neither. He listens to absorb, and that shift, it changes everything. Here's why it works. When a woman shares something vulnerable, a frustration, a fear, even a dream, and the man doesn't immediately try to fix it or make it about him, it signals emotional maturity. It says, "Your feelings don't threaten me." Contrast that with the guy who interrupts to one-up her story or dismisses her concern with a quick, "Don't worry about it." One leaves her feeling diminished, the other valued. And women don't just remember that feeling, they're drawn to it, because at its core, non-reactive listening isn't just a communication skill. It's a display of strength, the strength to stay present even when the conversation gets uncomfortable, the confidence to not need the last word. This isn't about passive silence, though. Stoic listening is active. It's the slight lean in, the eye contact that doesn't waver, the follow-up question that shows he was paying attention. It's resisting the urge to pivot the conversation back to himself. Ever notice how some men can make a 2-hour conversation feel like a monologue? The Stoic avoids that trap. He knows listening isn't just waiting for his turn to speak, it's making space for her to unfold. And when a woman feels that space, when she senses she won't be judged or rushed, something shifts. Walls come down, connection deepens, the beauty of this trait. It's learnable. Start small. Next conversation, focus on biting back the instinct to interrupt. Notice the urge to rebut or reframe and let it pass. Practice the pause. Over time, it becomes second nature, not as a tactic to impress, but as a way of being. Because the Stoic doesn't listen to win points. He listens because he understands something profound. The best conversations aren't about proving a point, they're about discovering one. And when a woman finds a man who truly grasps that, that's when listening becomes magnetic. Here's a man who doesn't bristle at criticism or scramble to shift blame. When he's wrong, he says it cleanly, without caveats or justifications. That's the fourth trait women spot in a Stoic man: unflinching ownership of mistakes. Picture two colleagues after a failed project. One spends the meeting deflecting. The timeline was unrealistic. The team dropped the ball. The client changed requirements. The other, I underestimated the complexities. Here's how I'll adjust. One voice reeks of insecurity. The other carries quiet authority. And guess which one earns respect, not just in the boardroom, but in relationships. Epictetus put it bluntly: if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That's the Stoic heart of accountability. It's not about groveling or self-flagellation. It's about recognizing that every misstep is raw material for growth. Women intuitively sense this distinction. A man who admits fault without crumbling isn't weak, he's secure. He doesn't tie his worth to perfection because he knows his value runs deeper than any single mistake. That kind of emotional resilience is catnip to women wired to seek partners who won't crumble under life's inevitable pressures. Modern culture often confuses accountability with weakness. Fragile egos spin narratives where they're always the victim, the misunderstood hero, the one exception to the rule. The Stoic rejects this entirely. When he forgets an anniversary, he doesn't blame work stress, he apologizes and sets a reminder. If he speaks harshly in anger, he doesn't justify it with "you provoked me." He owns the outburst and examines its root. This isn't self-punishment, it's self-mastery, and women notice because this trait reveals more than character. It reveals trustworthiness. A man comfortable with his flaws won't gaslight or manipulate to avoid facing them. But here's the subtle brilliance of Stoic accountability. It's proactive, not performative. Some men admit mistakes only to fish for reassurance. "I'm such an idiot," right? Hoping she'll soothe their ego. The Stoic, he states the error, identifies the lesson, and moves forward. No drama, no fishing for absolution, just a quiet commitment to do better. That's what makes ownership magnetic. It's not the admission itself that draws women in, it's the unshakable self-assurance behind it. The message is clear: I'm secure enough to be wrong and strong enough to grow from it. Think of it like lifting weights. Every repetition weakens the muscle before strengthening it. Similarly, every owned mistake temporarily stings the ego, but fortifies integrity. Women recognize this pattern instinctively. They've seen the opposite too often. Men who double down on bad behavior to avoid looking weak, who prioritize being right over being connected. The Stoic flips that script. His willingness to say, "I messed up," doesn't diminish him, it elevates him. because in a world allergic to accountability, the rarest trait isn't perfection. It's the courage to be imperfect and the wisdom to let that imperfection forge a better man. Ever watch a man step into an ice-cold shower without flinching? Or push through the last brutal set of a workout when every muscle screams to quit? That's not just physical endurance, it's discomfort tolerance, the fifth trait that makes Stoic men stand out. Seneca called it voluntary hardship, the deliberate choice to embrace difficulty as preparation for life's unavoidable storms. While most people flee discomfort, the Stoic leans into it, not as punishment but as training. And women notice this mental resilience instantly because it signals something profound. This is a man who won't fold when life gets hard. Take cold showers. On the surface, it seems trivial. Why endure unnecessary discomfort? But the Stoic sees deeper. It's about rewiring the instinct to avoid hardship at all costs. When a man willingly steps into that freezing water, he's not just building tolerance to cold. He's practicing the art of choosing his response. The body wants to recoil, but the mind remains steady. That same discipline translates to bigger challenges: a high-pressure job interview, a relationship conflict, a financial setback. Women recognize this connection instinctively. A man who trains himself to handle small discomforts without complaint is far more likely to weather life's major crises with the same unshakable calm. Seneca wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" That's the heart of Stoic discomfort training. It's not about deprivation for its own sake, but about proving to yourself that you can endure far more than you think. Hard workouts mirror this principle. When a man pushes past the burn in his muscles, when he finishes his last rep even though no one's watching, he's not just building strength, he's reinforcing a mindset. And that mindset spills into every area of his life. Here's what women see that most men miss. Discomfort tolerance isn't machismo. It's not about boasting or proving toughness. In fact, the truly Stoic man rarely talks about his cold showers or dawn runs because they're not for show. They're private victories, daily reminders that comfort is a preference, not a requirement. When a woman observes this quiet consistency, she instinctively trusts that this is someone who won't buckle under stress or seek the easy way out. That's why men who embrace voluntary hardship often find women drawn to them. Not because they're showing off, but because they're demonstrating a rare quality: ownership of their own resilience. The modern world conspires against discomfort. Endless conveniences from food delivery to temperature-controlled homes train us to avoid even minor inconvenience. But the Stoic resists this creep of comfort. He understands that life's real tests don't come with warning bells. They arrive as unexpected job losses, health scares, or heartbreaks. By willingly facing small hardships daily, he builds an inner arsenal for the battles that matter. Women sense this preparedness. It's not the cold shower itself that impresses, it's what it represents. A man who chooses discomfort today is a man who won't be shattered by it tomorrow. And in that unspoken strength lies an attraction deeper than any fleeting charm or clever pickup line. This is the subtle power of Stoic training. While others chase pleasure and avoid pain at all costs, the Stoic knows both are temporary and neither defines him. He doesn't seek suffering, but he doesn't fear it either. That balance creates a presence that's both grounded and magnetic. Because when a woman meets a man untouched by life's minor irritations, who greets delays, inconveniences, and even outright failures with the same steady demeanor, she doesn't just see someone tough. She sees someone safe, someone who won't add to life's chaos with emotional outbursts or fragile ego. And in a world where so many men break under pressure, that kind of quiet resilience doesn't just stand out, it draws her in. The sixth trait separates men who command respect from those who merely demand it: the ability to set boundaries without tipping into aggression. Imagine two co-workers. One loudly berates his assistant for interrupting his lunch, his face red, voice sharp. The other simply closes his laptop, looks up, and says, "I'll review this after I finish eating," with a tone so calm it leaves no room for debate. Both drew a line, but only one did it with dignity. Women notice this difference instantly because boundaries aren't about walls, they're about clarity. And clarity, delivered with composure, is irresistibly attractive. Stoicism reframes boundaries not as rejection but as alignment. Epictetus taught that we control our actions, not others' reactions, so saying no isn't rude if it's rooted in principle. A Stoic man might decline a last-minute favor not with annoyance but with simple honesty. "I can't commit to that today without compromising my existing obligations." No apology tours, no people-pleasing zigzags, just a direct response that honors his priorities without diminishing hers. This balance signals emotional maturity. Women recognize it because unconsciously they're assessing, can this man uphold his values without resorting to anger or guilt? Consider how most men handle boundary setting. Some cave instantly, terrified of conflict. Others bulldoze with brute force, no's that feel like punishments. The Stoic avoids both traps. When a friend pressures him to join a reckless venture, he doesn't stammer excuses. He might smile and say, "That's not where I'm putting my energy right now," leaving no ambiguity but zero hostility. That's the sweet spot women admire, a man who protects his time and values without making others feel small for asking. The magic lies in the delivery. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You can commit injustice by doing nothing." Passive silence when a boundary is crossed isn't kindness, it's cowardice. True respect means communicating limits before resentment builds. Picture a woman testing limits with flirtatious texts while he's in a relationship. The weak man ignores it, fearing confrontation. The aggressive one responds with accusations. The Stoic, he might reply once clearly, "I value our friendship, but those messages cross a line for me." No vitriol, no waffling, just a statement that honors both his commitment and her dignity. This skill extends to everyday moments too. When a date insists on picking the restaurant again, he doesn't fume silently. He might say, "I appreciated your choice last time tonight. I'd like to share one of my favorites." It's not dominance, it's equality. Women sense this deeply. A man who voices preferences without demanding submission demonstrates something rare: the confidence to stand firm and the security to leave space for others. That's the boundary tightrope, and the Stoic walks it effortlessly because his no comes from integrity, not insecurity. The lesson here isn't just about declining requests. It's about the posture behind it. A man who sets boundaries with grace shows he's governed by inner principles, not external reactions. And that's the ultimate test of Stoic strength, the ability to hold the line without needing to draw blood. When women encounter this, they don't just respect it. They're drawn to the safety it creates, the unspoken promise that this is a man who will honor their boundaries just as firmly. There's a quiet power in men who care deeply but never cling to outcomes. Picture two guys on first dates. One hangs on her every word, laughs too hard at mediocre jokes, his energy screaming, "Please like me." The other, just as engaged but with an ease that says, "I'm enjoying this moment, whatever happens." That's outcome detachment, the seventh trait that makes Stoic men magnetic. Women sense this freedom instantly because it's not indifference, it's the opposite. It's confidence rooted in effort, not approval. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, focusing solely on what's yours to command. Your preparation for the date, within your control, her reaction, not even slightly. A Stoic man internalizes this so deeply that his actions become pure, untainted by neediness. He dresses well because he respects himself, not to impress her. He asks thoughtful questions because he's genuinely curious, not to manipulate the conversation. That purity of intention is palpable. Women notice when a man's energy isn't tethered to their validation, and paradoxically, that's what pulls them closer. Think of it like archery. The Stoic sage Zeno compared life to shooting a bow. Your job is to aim carefully, release smoothly, and accept where the arrow lands. Obsessing over the target ruins the shot. The same applies to dating. Men who fixate on the outcome, will she text back, does she like me, inject desperation into every interaction. The Stoic stays present. He plans a great date because that's within his power, then releases attachment to the result. That lightness is irresistible because it signals abundance, the quiet assurance that one missed connection won't break him. This isn't faux aloofness. Detachment isn't pretending not to care, it's caring without condition. Look at how most men handle rejection. Some crumble, taking it as a verdict on their worth. Others lash out, accusing women of playing games. The Stoic, he thanks her for her time and moves forward, not because it didn't sting, but because he knows his value isn't negotiable. That graceful acceptance leaves an impression far deeper than any calculated pickup tactic ever could. Women remember the man who took no with dignity because it reveals more about his character than any yes ever could. Outcome detachment shines brightest under pressure. Imagine a job interview. The nervous candidate sweats over every answer, mentally begging for the offer. The Stoic candidate focuses on articulating his skills clearly, then walks out without looking back. That same energy applies to romance. When a man isn't emotionally leveraged on a particular result, he's free to be authentically engaging. His humor lands naturally because it's not strained through filters of, will this make her like me? His silence feels comfortable, not awkward, because it's not a void he's scrambling to fill. Women gravitate toward this authenticity because it's the rarest form of confidence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The magic lies in what this trait communicates unconsciously. A man detached from outcomes is a man who trusts his path. He doesn't see a single interaction as make or break because he knows life is a continuum of opportunities. That perspective is contagious. Women relax around him, not because he's indifferent, but because his calm assures them, whatever happens here, we'll both be fine. And in that space of mutual ease, real connection flourishes not as a transaction, but as a choice. That's the ultimate Stoic paradox. By releasing your grip on the outcome, you become the kind of man women choose to hold onto. There's a moment in every setback where the story splits the path of resentment or the path of gratitude. The Stoic takes the latter, not with forced cheer, but with clear-eyed recognition that even the bitterest pill can hold medicine. This is the eighth trait women instinctively admire: gratitude in adversity. Not the hollow, good vibes only variety, but the kind that stares down a layoff, a rejection, or a failure and asks, what does this make possible? That shift in perspective isn't just philosophical, it's magnetic, because when a man loses his job and tells his partner, this hurts, but it's pushing me towards something better, he's not just comforting her. He's proving he's the kind of man who won't be defined by circumstances. Consider two men facing the same career setback. One spirals into blame, railing against the economy, his boss, his luck. The other acknowledges the sting, then pivots. I've been wanting to pivot industries anyway. This might be the push I needed. Both feel the disappointment. Only one converts it into fuel. Women recognize this distinction immediately. It's not about pretending pain doesn't exist. It's about refusing to let pain have the final word. That's the Stoic balance, holding space for grief while steadfastly seeking the gift hidden in the rubble. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle is the way, not as a platitude but as a battle-tested truth." When a man applies this, it transforms how he navigates life's fractures. A missed promotion becomes time to build new skills. A breakup becomes clarity on what he truly values in a partner. This isn't blind optimism, it's strategic reframing, and women are wired to notice. Biologically, they're drawn to partners who exhibit resilience because resilience means survival. A man who can mine meaning from misfortune signals something primal. This is someone who won't collapse when storms hit. That assurance fosters a unique kind of trust, the kind that lets a woman think, if we face hardship, he won't drown us both in despair. The critical nuance here: Stoic gratitude never dismisses reality. It's not saying everything happens for a reason to someone in fresh grief. It's the quiet practice of asking, given that this happened, how do I grow from it? Take a small-scale example, a cancelled flight. The average person fumes at the gate. The Stoic opens his laptop and uses the delay to finish a project or calls a friend he's been meaning to catch up with. Same situation, radically different energy. Women pick up on this daily resilience because it's a preview of how a man will handle bigger crises. If he can find grace in a traffic jam, he's likely to bring that same groundedness to a health scare or financial strain. The most compelling part: this trait isn't performative. You can't fake gratitude in adversity any more than you can fake calm under pressure. Women spot the difference between someone parroting positive affirmations and someone who's done the inner work to truly believe them. That's why men who have weathered real storms and emerged with wisdom carry an undeniable presence. Their gratitude isn't naive, it's earned. When they say, "That failure was the best thing that could have happened," you believe them because their life proves it. This is the hidden superpower of Stoic gratitude. It doesn't just make setbacks bearable, it makes them transformative. A man who consistently extracts lessons from life's sucker punches becomes someone others instinctively lean on. Not because he has all the answers, but because he radiates the unshakable certainty that no matter what happens, we'll find a way forward. And in a world of constant uncertainty, that's the kind of man women don't just notice, they choose. Think about the last time you spoke with someone who gave you their complete, undivided attention, no glancing at their phone, no eyes darting over your shoulder to scan the room, no half-hearted nods while clearly mentally elsewhere. That kind of presence is rare, and when a man masters it, women notice, not just because it feels good to be heard, but because it signals something deeper, a respect so intrinsic it doesn't need to be announced. This is the 9th Stoic trait: unwavering presence in conversation, the kind that makes the person across from you feel like they're the only one in the room. Musonius Rufus put it bluntly: when you attend to anything, do it as if it were the most important thing in the world. That's the Stoic standard: not multitasking, not splitting focus, but dedicating your full attention as an act of reverence for the moment. Imagine a date where the man's phone stays untouched, not ostentatiously face down to prove a point, but simply forgotten because he's engrossed in what's being shared. Or a coffee chat where his eyes don't wander, even when an attractive woman walks by. That level of focus isn't just polite, it's powerful. Women interpret this unconsciously as both respect and security. A man who isn't distracted is a man who isn't desperate for the next best thing. Here's where most men stumble. They confuse physical proximity with actual presence. You can be sitting across from someone while mentally rehearsing your next response, composing a work email in your head, or worse, scanning for escape routes. Stoic presence is the opposite. It's the practice of silencing the internal noise to truly absorb what's being said. When a woman shares a story, the Stoic doesn't just wait for his turn to speak. He listens to understand, not to reply. That shift from transactional listening to immersive listening changes everything. Suddenly, conversations deepen. Connections accelerate because presence isn't just about hearing words. It's about catching the unspoken nuances, the hesitation in her voice, the spark when she talks about her passion, the flicker of vulnerability she tries to mask. The modern world is a minefield of distractions. Phones buzz, notifications pile up, conversations compete with the endless scroll of social media. In that chaos, a man who can shut it all out to focus on the person in front of him stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. But here's the catch: real presence can't be faked. Women have a sixth sense for performative attention. the guy who listens just long enough to seem polite before steering the conversation back to himself. The Stoic avoids this entirely. His focus isn't a tactic, it's a discipline. He trains himself to be present the same way he trains his body, through repetition and intentionality. Practical steps: start small. Next conversation, notice when your mind wanders and gently reel it back, not with self-judgment but with redirection. Leave your phone in your pocket, not as a statement but as a commitment to the moment. Practice the art of follow-up questions that prove you were listening. You mentioned your project was underfunded. How did you pivot? These subtle acts compound over time into a reputation as someone who truly engages. And women don't just appreciate that, they're drawn to it. Because in an age of fractured attention, a man who offers his full focus isn't just practicing good manners. He's demonstrating a rare form of strength, the strength to value connection over consumption, to choose depth over distraction. The Stoics knew this truth centuries ago. Presence is the ultimate form of respect. When you give someone your undivided attention, you're silently telling them, in this moment, nothing matters more than this exchange. And that message, delivered not with words but through action, resonates on a level no clever pickup line ever could. It's the quiet magnetism of a man who isn't just physically there but wholly, unshakably here. And in a world where so many are everywhere but present, that trait doesn't just stand out, it lingers. Long after the conversation ends, think about the men you know who seem to have an invisible rhythm to their days, the ones who wake at the same time without an alarm, who never miss a workout, who carve out quiet moments for reading or reflection no matter how packed their schedule. That's not rigidity, it's ritual, and it's the 10th trait women instinctively recognize in Stoic men, the quiet power of consistent routines. There's something undeniably magnetic about a man who governs his own time with intention, not because he's obsessive, but because he understands that how he starts and structures his days ultimately shapes who he becomes. Discipline often gets mislabeled as deprivation, but Stoicism reframes it as freedom. Seneca wrote, "No one is free who is a slave to his own impulses." When a man has non-negotiables, whether it's an hour with dumbbells at dawn, journaling before bed, or unplugged Sundays, he's not just building habits. He's broadcasting self-mastery. Women notice this subconsciously because predictability in small things signals reliability in big ones. A man who can commit to showing up for himself daily is far more likely to show up consistently in a relationship. Contrast that with a guy whose life feels like a series of frantic reactions, skipped meals, haphazard sleep, workouts that only happen when he's motivated. Chaos might seem exciting in the short term, but long term, it's exhausting, and women pick up on that fatigue before he even speaks. Consider two men's mornings. One stumbles out of bed 15 minutes late, chugs coffee to compensate for poor sleep, and rushes out the door with no plan. The other rises early, hydrates, moves his body, and dedicates 10 minutes to stillness, not as a performance but as a foundation. Both will face the same external stresses that day, but their internal experiences will be worlds apart. The Stoics' routine isn't about control, it's about creating buffers against life's unpredictability. When traffic jams or work crises hit, he's anchored by the stability of his rituals. That grounded energy is palpable. Women sense it in his posture, his patience, his ability to handle surprises without unraveling. The brilliance of Stoic routines lies in their simplicity. They're not about cramming every minute with productivity. In fact, many rituals are deliberately slow, brewing tea mindfully, walking without headphones, reviewing the day's lessons with pen and paper. These pauses telegraph something vital. This is a man who values depth over distraction, and in an age of endless scrolling and fractured attention, that's catnip to women craving genuine connection. A man who can disconnect from the digital noise to engage fully with his own thoughts is the same man who'll put his phone away during dinner to engage fully with her. Here's where most men misunderstand consistency. They assume women are drawn to the results, the chiseled physique from daily gym sessions, the polished presentations from meticulous preparation. But what truly resonates is the process itself. Watching a man honor his commitments to himself, not when it's easy, but when it's hard, reveals character in a way words never could. Rainy morning runs when no one's watching. Journal entries written in hotel rooms after brutal travel days, meditation sessions squeezed in before late-night shifts. These small acts of fidelity to one's values whisper louder than any grand gesture. This is someone who does what he says he'll do. The contrast with chaotic living couldn't be starker. A man who's perpetually late, chronically overcommitted, or physically run down from neglecting basics like sleep and nutrition doesn't just signal disorganization, he signals a lack of self-regard. And women, consciously or not, translate that into a question. If he can't take care of himself, how will he care for a partnership? The Stoics' routines answer that unspoken doubt before it even forms. His life isn't perfect, but it's ordered. Not rigidly, but flexibly, like bamboo that bends in the wind but never breaks because its roots run deep. This trait's power lies in its cumulative effect. Day after day, month after month, the man who honors his rituals becomes someone fundamentally different. Not just stronger or more productive, but steadier. And that steadiness, it's the ultimate silent credential. No need to announce his discipline. It's evident in the calm of his eyes, the ease of his movements, the unshakable sense that whatever life throws, he'll meet it, not with panic, but with practiced grace. Women don't just notice that, they're drawn to it, because in a world of flux, a man who's mastered the art of showing up for himself first is the safest harbor of all. There's a special kind of laughter that leaves no one diminished, the kind that unites rather than divides, that sparkles with intelligence instead of stinging with cruelty. This is the 11th trait of Stoic men, humor rooted in lightness, never at the expense of others. Imagine a dinner party where one guy dominates with cutting remarks about the waiter's accent, while another diffuses tension with a playful jab at his own terrible golf swing. One creates connection, the other invisible fractures. Women notice this distinction instantly because humor isn't just about making people laugh, it's about revealing character. The Stoics called this sympatheia, the belief that we're all threads in the same fabric. When a man's humor respects that interconnectedness, it becomes a tool for bonding, not exclusion. Take self-deprecating wit. Done right, it's a masterclass in confidence. A Stoic man might trip on a curb and quip, "And they say I used to be a dancer," shrugging off the stumble without a trace of shame. That quick, graceful pivot does two things. It disarms the moment, and it signals he's secure enough to laugh at himself. Contrast that with the guy who masks insecurity by ridiculing others. Women discern the difference immediately. One reeks of fragility, the other radiates ease. Modern comedy often conflates edginess with intelligence, as if the harsher the roast, the sharper the mind. Stoicism rejects that entirely. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." Yet his response wasn't scorn, it was compassion. A Stoic's humor mirrors that. When a colleague takes credit for his idea, he might chuckle and say, "Guess my brainstorming was so good it became contagious." The burn is there, but it's wrapped in warmth. That balance, assertiveness without malice, is irresistibly attractive because it proves emotional maturity. Women aren't just drawn to the laughter he creates, they're drawn to the safety he cultivates. This isn't about sanitizing humor or policing jokes, it's about intentionality. The Stoic asks himself, is this laughter building bridges or burning them? Consider two approaches to a failed date. One man mocks her interests to his friends. She actually thinks astrology's real, can you believe it? The other texts his buddy, "Turns out my charm doesn't work on people who read star charts." Both are funny, but one punches down, the other sideways at himself. Women instinctively gravitate toward the latter, not just because it's kinder, but because it reveals a man who doesn't need to belittle others to feel tall. The real magic of Stoic humor lies in its spontaneity. It's not rehearsed one-liners or recycled memes. It's the ability to find lightness in real time. When plans fall apart, he doesn't complain, he deadpans. Guess the universe really wanted us to try that backup plan. When she spills wine on his shirt, he grins and says, "Now it matches my embarrassment." These moments aren't just about quick wit, they're about reframing stress as shared play. And that shift, it's transformative. Women remember the man who turned mishaps into inside jokes, because those are the men who make life feel lighter, even when it's heavy. The lesson here isn't to become a stand-up comic. It's simpler. Let humor be an extension of your values. Laugh with people, not at them. Tease gently, mock sparingly, and when in doubt, aim the spotlight at yourself. Because the man who can laugh at his own flaws doesn't just make others comfortable. He proves he's at peace with being human. And in a world that takes itself too seriously, that kind of effortless levity doesn't just stand out, it draws people in. A man in a tailored suit steps out of a rented Lamborghini, checking his Rolex as the valet scrambles to open the door. Across the street, another man wearing well-worn but cared-for boots walks out of the bookstore with a stack of philosophy texts under his arm, heading toward the bus stop. Which one commands more respect? That's the 12th trait women recognize in Stoic men. Financial restraint, not penny-pinching austerity, but the quiet wisdom of knowing money is a tool, not a trophy. Seneca put it bluntly, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. When a man understands this, his choices reveal more than his bank balance, they reveal his maturity. Flashy displays of wealth scream insecurity. Think about it, the guy who accidentally flashes his Amex black card on a first date isn't signaling success, he's begging for validation. True financial confidence doesn't need an audience. It's the subtle choices, opting for a modest but well-maintained car over leased luxury, choosing a local artisan watch over a logo-splattered status symbol, or investing in a workshop rather than bottle service at the club. Women notice these decisions because they're not about impressing others, they're about honoring resources. One whispers, "Look what I can buy," the other says, "See what I can build." The Stoic approach to money isn't about deprivation, it's about intention. Consider how two men might spend a bonus. One blows it on a designer wardrobe to post humble flex mirror selfies. The other uses it to pay down debt, fund a certification course, or take his grandmother on a trip she's always dreamed of. Both have the same amount of money. Only one understands its purpose. Women instinctively gravitate toward this discernment because it signals long-term thinking, a trait evolutionarily linked to stability and security. A man who prioritizes financial health over hollow displays isn't just planning for next month. He's building a life that can weather storms. This restraint shines brightest in moments of social pressure. Picture a dinner where friends insist on splitting the bill for overpriced cocktails they didn't touch. The financially wise man doesn't seethe silently or make a scene. He might smile and say, "I'll cover my steak, you guys enjoy those $20 martinis." It's not stinginess, it's boundary setting with humor and grace. Or imagine a date suggesting an extravagant restaurant. Instead of anxiously agreeing to avoid looking cheap, he counters with, "I know a place with better food at half the price, let me show you." That pivot isn't about saving money, it's about valuing experience over pretense. Women register this confidence immediately, the kind that doesn't need to buy approval. The most compelling aspect of financial restraint, it's egalitarian. A man who's equally comfortable at a 5-star resort or a roadside diner, not as a performance of being down to earth, but because he genuinely finds joy in both, exudes a security that's magnetic. He doesn't need luxury to feel worthy or shun it to feel virtuous. His wallet isn't his personality. This balance is catnip to women because it reveals emotional intelligence, the understanding that money amplifies who you already are but can never compensate for who you're not. Practical stewardship speaks louder than any luxury purchase ever could. A well-organized budget spreadsheet, a retirement account started early, the ability to explain compound interest to a nephew, these are the modern equivalents of the Stoics' disciplined coin purse. They signal a man who respects resources enough to manage them wisely, not because he's obsessed with wealth, but because he respects the freedom it provides. And that's the ultimate distinction. Flashy spending screams, "I need you to see this." Quiet stewardship whispers, "I see what matters." Women don't just hear that whisper, they lean in closer to catch it. Because behind every unassuming choice lies a quiet truth. The most attractive currency isn't money, it's mastery. Every relationship has its flashpoints, the moments when tempers flare, voices rise, and words threaten to leave permanent marks. Now watch two men in that crucible. One snaps back with equal venom, his tone sharpening to match hers. The other takes a breath, lowers his volume instead of raising it, and responds with the measured calm of someone refusing to be dragged into the storm. That's the 13th trait women can't ignore, remaining unshakably calm in conflict. It's not about suppressing emotions or avoiding tough conversations. It's about embodying Marcus Aurelius's insight. The best revenge is to not be like your enemy. When a man meets heat with steady presence, he's not just diffusing an argument, he's proving he can be trusted with her rawest moments. The Stoics saw anger as temporary madness, a fire that burns the one who carries it. Picture a couple arguing over forgotten plans. The reactive man might lash out, "You're always nagging." "Nothing's ever good enough." The Stoic, he might pause, then say quietly, "I hear your disappointment. Let's figure out how to fix this." That shift from attacking the person to addressing the problem changes everything. Women register this difference on a visceral level. It's not just about the words, it's about the safety his composure creates. In that moment, he's not just a partner, he's an anchor. Here's the critical nuance: calm isn't indifference. Some men mistake Stoic detachment for stonewalling, shutting down emotionally to win the fight. That's not resolve, it's retreat. True Stoic calm leans into discomfort without mirroring it. Imagine her criticizing his forgetfulness. Instead of defending, "I've got a lot on my mind." He might reflect, "You're right, that's happened a few times lately." What would help? That response does three things. It validates her concern, avoids defensiveness, and redirects energy toward solutions. Women notice this maturity instantly because it's the hallmark of someone who prioritizes resolution over ego. Biological wiring plays a role here. Studies show women's nervous systems are more sensitive to tonal shifts and nonverbal cues during conflict. A raised voice or clenched jaw doesn't just feel hostile, it triggers a physiological stress response. The Stoic man understands this implicitly. His tone stays even, his posture open, his words deliberate. Even if the topic is heated, his delivery remains grounded. That consistency signals emotional safety, a rare quality in a world where many men equate aggression with strength. The real test comes in public confrontations. Say a stranger cuts in line at the grocery store. Most men either fume silently or escalate. "Hey, jerk, the line's back here." The Stoic, he might raise an eyebrow and say, "You in a hurry, we all are." No insults, no posturing, just a firm but neutral redirection. Women watching that exchange don't just see a man handling conflict, they see a man who respects himself too much to be rattled by pettiness. That quiet assurance is magnetic because it whispers, "I don't need to dominate to prove my worth." This skill isn't innate, it's trained. The Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, envisioning conflicts before they happen to rehearse rational responses. Modern men can borrow that playbook. Before a tough conversation, they might mentally outline their boundaries. "I won't interrupt. I'll breathe before responding. If voices rise, I'll suggest a pause. That preparation prevents knee-jerk reactions. Over time, calm becomes reflexive, not because the man doesn't feel anger, but because he's mastered its expression. The paradox: by refusing to match her intensity in arguments, the Stoic often reduces it. Like pouring water on a grease fire, his calm smothers the escalation. Women remember this long after the conflict fades, not just the resolution, but the way it was reached. They're drawn to men who can hold space for strong emotions without being consumed by them. Because in the end, anyone can shout, but it takes real strength to stay steady when everything in you wants to erupt. And that kind of strength, it doesn't just end fights. It builds trust. There's a silent language the body speaks one women decipher instinctively. It's not about height or muscle mass, but the quiet authority of physical poise, shoulders squared but relaxed, movements smooth and intentional, a gaze that meets hers without darting away. This is the 14th trait of Stoic men, the harmony between outer composure and inner stillness. Think of a man walking into a room. One slouches, eyes flicking nervously at exits, hands fidgeting with his phone. The other moves with the unhurried confidence of someone who owns the space he occupies. Neither has spoken, yet their bodies already told a story. Women read these cues in milliseconds because posture isn't just about anatomy. It's a window to a man's relationship with himself. The Stoics weren't just philosophers hunched over scrolls. They wrestled, ran, and trained their bodies with the same discipline as their minds. Marcus Aurelius, despite the burdens of empire, practiced weightlifting and boxing. Why? Because they understood a profound truth. The body isn't separate from the mind, it's its mirror. When a man stands tall, it's not vanity, it's an outward reflection of inner order. Slouching doesn't just compress the spine, it telegraphs submission to life's weights. Conversely, steady eye contact doesn't assert dominance, it whispers, "I'm present and unafraid to be seen." These aren't tricks to manipulate perception, they're the physical manifestations of a psyche that's reconciled with itself. Consider two handshakes. One's a limp, half-hearted clasp, palm damp, grip fleeting. The other's firm but not crushing, accompanied by a brief but solid meeting of eyes. The difference isn't strength, it's attention. The Stoic handshake says, "For this moment, nothing deserves my focus more than this connection." Women register that immediacy. It's the same reason they notice when a man's hands stay still during conversation instead of fidgeting with keys or picking at his nails. Stillness isn't passivity, it's the body's way of declaring, "I'm not scattered, I'm here." Ancient Stoics practiced prosouch attention to the present moment. That discipline extended to their physicality. Epictetus, born a slave, carried himself with such dignity that students traveled miles to study under him, not because he preached grandeur, but because his bearing embodied his teachings. A modern man can channel this without togas or lectures. It's in the way he sits at a cafe, not slumped over his phone, but upright, observing the world around him. Or how he listens, leaning slightly forward, nodding thoughtfully, never interrupting. These micro gestures don't just convey respect for others, they reveal self-respect. The most compelling part: poise isn't innate, it's cultivated. The Stoics trained their bodies like soldiers, not for war, but for equilibrium. Modern equivalents exist. Martial arts teach controlled movement under pressure. Yoga aligns breath with motion. Even lifting weights can become Stoic practice when the focus isn't on muscle size, but on mastering form. Each rep a meditation on precision. Women spot the difference between a man who works out for Instagram and one who trains for self-mastery. One's posture screams, "Look at me," the other murmurs, "I know myself." There's a neuroscience secret here too. Studies show that adopting confident body postures, even artificially, boosts testosterone and lowers cortisol. The Stoics intuited this millennia ago. The body shapes the mind as much as the mind shapes the body. When a man rolls his shoulders back during stress, he's not just improving his silhouette, he's signaling his nervous system to calm itself. Women subconsciously pick up on this biofeedback loop. A man whose breathing stays steady in a crisis doesn't just look unflappable, his physiology becomes it. Ultimately, physical poise is about economy, every motion purposeful, every gesture measured. Not the stiffness of a statue, but the fluidity of a river, moving when necessary, still when not. When a woman sees a man cross a room without rushing or hold a silence without fidgeting, she's witnessing more than good manners. She's seeing a man at peace with his own presence. And in a world of frenetic energy and performative hustle, that kind of quiet assurance doesn't just stand out. It invites, because nothing's more magnetic than a man who doesn't need to fill the space around him, but simply occupies it, completely, unapologetically, and still. There's a fine line between building trust and burdening someone with your past, a line the Stoic walks with precision. Selective vulnerability isn't about hiding scars, it's about knowing which ones to illuminate and which to let speak for themselves. Picture two men sharing stories over drinks. One spills every heartbreak, every job loss, every childhood wound in a single night, his voice tinged with the unspoken expectation, "Now comfort me." The other pauses, then offers just one story, a failure he once thought would break him, reframed with the clarity of hindsight. "That rejection forced me to build something better." Both are vulnerable, but only one leaves her thinking, "I want to know more." That's the art of strategic openness. The Stoics recognize that not all truths need airing, but the right ones shared at the right time can bridge souls. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal, yet his public speeches were measured, revealing just enough to connect without oversharing. Modern men can learn from this balance. Imagine a first date where, instead of trauma dumping about his ex, he mentions a past relationship humbly. "We grew in different directions, but it taught me what I truly value." That subtle shift from victimhood to growth transforms vulnerability from a weight into a gift. Women don't just hear the story, they sense the strength it took to refine pain into perspective. Here's where most men miss the mark. Some mistake vulnerability for verbal diarrhea, unloading every insecurity to prove they're emotional. Others armor up completely, fearing any crack will ruin their image. The Stoic navigates between these extremes. When asked about his struggles, he might share a professional setback, not to fish for sympathy, but to illustrate resilience. "I lost that client and realized I'd tied my worth to their approval. Now I chase mastery, not validation." That's vulnerability with purpose. It's not about the wound, it's about the suture. And women notice the difference because it reveals a man who's not just strong, but whole, someone who's faced his shadows without being consumed by them. Timing is everything. A Stoic doesn't reveal his battles too soon, like a salesman hustling for pity points. He waits for the moment when the sharing will deepen, not dominate the connection. Think of it like a campfire. Dump all the logs on at once and you smother the flames. Add them gradually and the heat builds steadily. A third date mention of overcoming depression. Powerful if framed as growth. A first date monologue about therapy, overwhelming. Women instinctively recognize this pacing, not as calculation but as emotional intelligence. They're drawn to men who understand that trust isn't built in a landslide, but brick by brick. The magic lies in the framing. Raw emotion isn't the goal, refined insight is. Compare "my dad walked out, so now I'm terrified of commitment" with "my father's absence taught me what it means to show up for others and for myself." Same pain, radically different energy. One casts the woman as therapist, the other invites her as witness to his evolution. This is the alchemy of selective vulnerability, turning leaden experiences into golden wisdom without demanding others carry their weight. Ultimately, this trait whispers two things simultaneously. I've been through fire and I've come out forged. Women don't just admire that, they're drawn to it. Because a man who can share his scars without reopening them isn't just telling a story. he's proving he's someone who can hold space for her stories too. And in that unspoken exchange, connection finds its deepest roots. Some men give to get their kindness comes with invisible price tags, their favors laced with silent expectations. That's not generosity, it's emotional barter. Now watch a Stoic man. He picks up the tab not to impress, but because he genuinely enjoys hosting. He offers help without a mental ledger tracking debts. When he gives, there's no subtext of "you owe me," just the quiet joy of contributing. Women spot this distinction instantly because real generosity isn't about the act itself, but the freedom it carries. No strings, no scorekeeping, just a heart that's open without being needy. Epictetus cut to the core: what you shun enduring yourself, don't inflict on others. Translation: if you hate feeling manipulated, don't cloak manipulation in kindness. The nice guy who fumes when his coffee favors don't lead to dates isn't kind, he's transactional. Contrast that with the man who drives a friend to the airport at 4 a.m. simply because it's the right thing to do. No social media post, no subtle reminder later. His giving is pure precisely because it expects nothing in return. Women recognize this purity like a sixth sense. It's the difference between a gift and a bribe. Here's where Stoic generosity shines. It's rooted in self-sufficiency. The man who gives from abundance, emotional or material, doesn't treat every act as an investment. Imagine two co-workers covering a shift. One sighs, "Fine, but you're buying me lunch tomorrow." The other says, "I've got you, we've all been there." Both help, but only one leaves the recipient feeling light instead of indebted. Women notice this in dating too. The guy who insists on paying for dinner and makes sure she knows it's his treat hasn't mastered generosity. He's still chasing approval. The Stoic, he might quietly handle the check, then change the subject to her upcoming project. The message is clear: this isn't a down payment on your affection. Ancient Stoics practiced philanthropia, love of humanity, not as a grand gesture but in daily micro-choices. Seneca gave away fortunes anonymously. Musonius Rufus taught that wealth's value lay in its ability to uplift others. Modern men can channel this without ancient budgets. It's tipping the street musician extra because you admire his hustle, not because she's watching. It's mentoring a younger colleague without name-dropping it at parties. These acts resonate because they're not performances, they're extensions of character. Women don't just see these moments, they file them away as evidence of something deeper. A man whose kindness isn't currency but compass, the litmus test. How he gives when no one's looking. The Stoic doesn't announce his donations or fish for gratitude. He might shovel a neighbor's driveway before dawn or leave a book he loved on a co-worker's desk with a post-it. "Thought you'd appreciate this." No fanfare, no follow-up. That's the essence of strings-free generosity. It's not about the giver's ego, but the recipient's need. And when a woman witnesses that selflessness, it doesn't just impress her, it disarms her. Because in a world full of men keeping score, the one who gives freely stands out like a torch in the dark. The beauty of this trait is its ripple effect. Real generosity doesn't deplete, it multiplies. The man who helps without expectation often finds it returned in unexpected ways, not because he demanded it, but because his energy inspired reciprocity. Women are drawn to this cycle not as benefactors but as participants. They recognize the man who gives without strings is the same man who'll love without conditions, who'll stand firm without demand. And that's the ultimate alchemy, turning ordinary kindness into quiet, irresistible strength. Time respect is more than arriving early. It's a philosophy woven into every interaction. Consider two men texting a date. One blows past the agreed upon meeting time with a casual running late and a flurry of excuses. The other not only arrives 10 minutes early, but spends those moments fully present, phone tucked away, eyes scanning the room with quiet focus. That subtle discipline isn't just courtesy, it's a live demonstration of amor fati, the Stoic practice of loving one's fate by wholly embracing the present. Women decode this instantly because how a man treats time reveals how he values what and who fills it. Punctuality might seem like superficial etiquette, but the Stoics saw it as reverence. Seneca wrote, "Time is the one thing we can never reclaim." When a man plans ahead to avoid making others wait, he's not just managing minutes, he's honoring the irreplaceable. Picture a woman dressing for a date, choosing an outfit, anticipating the evening. Every minute he's late chips at that anticipation, turning excitement into doubt. The Stoic understands this ripple effect. His punctuality isn't robotic precision, it's a silent acknowledgement. Your preparation deserves my consideration. That unspoken respect builds trust before the first drink is ordered. Yet true time respect goes deeper than clocks. It's the quality of attention that follows. The man who checks his phone mid-conversation isn't just distracted, he's telegraphing that the moment isn't worth his full participation. Contrast that with the Stoic's habit of single-tasking. When he listens, his hands stay still. His nods aren't perfunctory but purposeful, confirming he's absorbed her words. This isn't performative, active listening from a self-help book. It's the natural result of a mind trained to dwell wholly in the now. Women notice this presence like a physical warmth because in an age of fractured focus, undivided attention is the rarest form of generosity. The magic lies in consistency. Anyone can be punctual for a first date or a job interview. The Stoic applies the same principle to mundane moments, showing up exactly when he said he would for a coffee, catch up with an old friend, or returning a borrowed book on the promised day without reminders. These small acts compound into a reputation. This is someone whose words align with his actions. Women instinctively extrapolate from these patterns. If he respects her time in trivial matters, he'll likely honor bigger commitments, whether remembering an anniversary or supporting her through a crisis. There's an underrated aspect to this trait, the grace of exit. The Stoic knows that overstaying can be as disrespectful as arriving late. When a dinner naturally winds down, he doesn't linger awkwardly or invent reasons to stretch the night. He recognizes the cadence of the evening and concludes it with the same intentionality it began. This isn't abruptness, it's emotional attunement. Women appreciate this awareness because it proves he's attentive not just to his own desires but to her energy and boundaries. Ultimately, time respect is the intersection of discipline and empathy. It's the outward manifestation of Seneca's wisdom, treating others' hours as the finite treasure they are. When a woman encounters a man who guards her time as fiercely as his own, she doesn't just feel valued, she senses something deeper, a partner who won't waste her life on empty promises or half-hearted presents. And in a world drowning in distractions, that kind of reliability doesn't just stand out. It becomes the foundation of something lasting. A crowded restaurant, you shouldn't be a battleground. Yet watch how many men freeze under its weight, flipping pages like they're defusing a bomb. Now contrast that with the man who scans briefly, then closes his menu with a quiet, "I'll have the steak." No second guessing, no polling the table for consensus. That's decisiveness in its simplest form, and women notice it immediately. Not because the choice itself matters, but because how a man makes decisions reveals everything about his relationship with himself. Stoic decisiveness isn't impulsivity, it's the offspring of clarity and conviction. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." Be one, that razor-edge focus cuts through hesitation. Picture two job offers, one safe but stagnant, the other risky but aligned with passion. The hesitant man agonizes for weeks, seeking endless advice. The Stoic weighs the variables swiftly, then acts. His deliberation is thorough, but his commitment is absolute. Women recognize this dichotomy. The man who moves with intention isn't reckless, he's resolved. And that resolution is magnetic because it whispers, "I trust my judgment enough to stand by it." Here's the critical distinction. Decisiveness isn't about always being right, it's about being committed. The Stoic orders the steak knowing he might prefer the salmon, but he refuses to let regret poison his meal. He proposes a vacation spot fully aware another city might have been sunnier. Why? Because he understands a truth most miss. Second-guessing corrodes joy. Women subconsciously relax around this mindset. A partner who can choose a movie without an existential crisis will likely handle bigger decisions with the same steady hand. The hesitation trap plagues modern men. Society trains them to seek endless data, to crowdsource opinions until certainty feels attainable, but life doesn't work that way. The Stoic knows some doors must be walked through blind. When dating, this shows up in subtle ways: planning a weekend getaway without endless back-and-forth texts, or initiating the first kiss without awkward verbal permission seeking. These aren't acts of dominance, they're demonstrations of a mind comfortable with agency. Women interpret this as emotional efficiency. Here's a man who won't drain my energy with indecision. Neuroscience backs this allure. Studies show decisiveness triggers the brain's reward systems both in the decider and those around him. It's why a waiter sighs in relief when the table's designated orderer takes charge, or why a team rallies behind a leader who can pivot strategies without paralysis. That same chemistry fuels attraction. A woman watching a man confidently navigate a detour during a road trip isn't just admiring his GPS skills, she's glimpsing his ability to steer through life's unpredictability. The Stoic secret: he practices small decisions daily to train for big ones. He picks his workout routine in seconds, not after scrolling forums for hours. He donates old clothes without deliberating if he might wear them someday. This muscle memory transfers to higher stakes. When most men would waffle, should I relocate for her job? Is now the time to propose? The Stoic's mental framework already knows: deliberate, then act. No decision is immune to error, but regret is reserved for those who refuse to choose at all. What women ultimately sense in decisive men isn't infallibility. It's the courage to own a choice and the resilience to course correct if needed, because hesitation isn't just unattractive, it's contagious. But so is conviction, and in a world drowning in options but starved for direction, the man who moves with quiet certainty doesn't just stand out, he becomes the compass others instinctively follow. Confidence that competes is merely insecurity in disguise. Picture two men at a networking event. One sizes up every handshake, his jokes a little too sharp, his anecdotes subtly crafted to outshine. The other listens more than he speaks, celebrates others' wins without reservation, and offers connections freely, not as a power play but as genuine currency. That's non-competitive confidence in action, and women recognize it instantly, not because it's loud but because it's rare. This isn't about false humility or shrinking to make others comfortable. It's the quiet assurance of a man who knows his worth doesn't diminish when others rise. Seneca's gem metaphor cuts deep. Polishing requires friction, but the goal isn't to destroy the whetstone, it's to refine the edge. The Stoic man embodies this. When a colleague lands the promotion he wanted, he doesn't cloak bitterness in backhanded praise. He might say, "You earned this, let me know how I can support your transition." That response does three things. It acknowledges reality, demonstrates security, and positions him as someone who sees beyond zero-sum games. Women interpret this lack of scarcity mindset as emotional maturity, the kind that fosters trust rather than rivalry. Modern masculinity often mislabels competition as strength. The gym bro who scowls at others' progress, the entrepreneur who trash talks competitors to elevate himself, these aren't displays of power. They're admissions of fragility. True Stoic confidence is otherworldly in contrast. Imagine a first date where she mentions an ex who's a successful musician. The insecure man feels threatened, steering conversation toward his own achievements. The Stoic, he might ask what she admired about that relationship. then share his own passions without drawing comparisons. That ease, the ability to exist without measuring himself against every man in the room, signals a depth of self-possession women instinctively gravitate toward. The biological wiring here is fascinating. Studies show women are subconsciously attuned to social hierarchy dynamics. A man who uplifts others broadcasts two critical messages: I'm secure in my status and I create alliances, not enemies. These traits were survival imperatives for early humans. Tribes led by cooperative men thrived, while those dominated by infighting faltered. Today's equivalent. The man who introduces colleagues to valuable contacts without keeping score, who cheers for friends' milestones as if they were his own. Women don't just admire this generosity, they see it as evolutionary proof of a partner who will foster harmony, not drama. Here's where Stoicism flips the script. Non-competitive men often advance faster, not despite their lack of gamesmanship, but because of it. Consider mentorship. The average professional hoards knowledge to maintain an edge. The Stoic shares insights freely, knowing teaching solidifies his own mastery while lifting others. Over time, this builds networks rooted in reciprocity, not transaction. Romantic relationships mirror this principle. The man who doesn't view other suitors as threats but as irrelevant to his own worth paradoxically becomes more desirable. Why? Because his confidence isn't contingent, it's inherent. The ultimate test comes in platonic friendships with attractive men. The insecure guy avoids introducing his girlfriend to his handsome, charismatic friend, or worse, subtly undermines him in group settings. The Stoic, he invites that friend to gatherings without a second thought, knowing genuine connection isn't threatened by proximity to excellence. This lack of territorial posturing is catnip to women because it reveals a man who doesn't see love as a prize to be guarded, but as a bond built on mutual choice. Practical applications abound. Next time someone excels in your field, dissect your reaction. Jealousy, that's feedback. Indifference, that's growth. Better yet, reach out with specific praise, not generic "great job," but "the way you handled that client objection was masterful." Mind sharing your approach. That shift from competitor to collaborator doesn't just refine your craft, it refines your character, and women notice character long before they notice credentials. The paradox at the heart of this trait is exquisite. The less a man competes for validation, the more it finds him. Not because he's playing some reverse psychology game, but because his energy is free from the desperation that taints so many interactions. When a woman encounters a man who celebrates others as effortlessly as he celebrates himself, she doesn't just see confidence, she sees liberation from comparison, from pettiness, from the exhausting charade of proving worth. And in that liberation lies the rarest form of attraction, the kind that feels not like a spark but like coming home. Silence isn't empty space, it's the canvas where presence becomes art. Watch two men in conversation. One rushes to fill every pause with nervous chatter, his sentences littered with ums and likes as if silence were a void to be feared. The other lets the quiet breathe, his pauses deliberate, his words thoughtful islands in a calm sea of stillness. That's silence mastery, and women don't just hear the difference, they feel it in their bones. This isn't about playing the strong, silent trope. It's about embodying a truth the Stoics knew well. The man comfortable with silence is a man at peace with himself. The ancient Stoics practiced hesychia, the discipline of stillness, not as a performance but as a way to drain the poison of needless words. Marcus Aurelius wrote his deepest insights in private, not for applause but for clarity. A modern man channels this when he resists the urge to over-explain, to justify, to fill the air with noise just to prove he's there. Picture a first date lull. The anxious guy panics, blurting out whatever pops into his head. The Stoic, he sips his drink, lets the moment stretch, then offers a single considered observation, maybe about the jazz playing overhead or the way the light hits her laugh lines. That restraint speaks louder than any monologue. I don't need your validation to exist in this space. Here's what most men miss. Filler words aren't just verbal tics, they're leaks in a confidence tank. Every and whispers, I'm unsure of my own thoughts. Women decode this subconsciously. Contrast that with the man who pauses mid-sentence to find the right word, unafraid of the quiet while he searches. That momentary silence isn't awkward, it's magnetic. It says what I'm about to say is worth waiting for. Ever notice how the most compelling speakers, Obama, Denzel, Keanu, aren't afraid to let silence work for them? They understand what the Stoics taught. Mastery over speech begins with mastery over stillness. Practical training hides in everyday moments. The next time you're tempted to fill a pause with chatter, try this: count 2 slow breaths in your head before responding. Not as a manipulation tactic, but as recalibration. Notice how conversations deepen when you replace with eye contact, how tension dissipates when you don't rush to paper over quiet with noise. Women interpret this comfort with pauses as emotional endurance, the ability to sit with discomfort without reflexively numbing it. That's why a man who can enjoy a shared silence on a long drive or a lazy Sunday morning telegraphs something profound. I don't need constant stimulation to feel alive. The biological undercurrent here is fascinating. Studies show women's brains are wired to process more nonverbal data per second than men's. Micro-expressions, tonal shifts, the weight of unsaid things. When a man masters silence, he's speaking directly to that intuitive faculty. His pauses become punctuation, his stillness a language of its own. Think of the last time someone truly listened to you, not just waited for their turn to talk, but let your words land fully before responding. That space between sentences wasn't dead air, it was respect crystallized. But here's the critical nuance: Stoic silence isn't withdrawal. It's not the cold shoulder or passive aggression. It's the art of being present without needing to prove you're present. The man who texts back thoughtfully instead of immediately hasn't lost interest. He's demonstrating he engages on his own terms. The one who doesn't laugh at every joke isn't aloof, he's preserving authenticity. Women instinctively trust this measured rhythm because it mirrors nature's own: the pause between waves, the silence before dawn. The ultimate test comes in conflict. Most men either flood the zone with words or shut down entirely. The Stoic does neither. He lets her anger or sadness fill the room without reflexively trying to fix or match it. His silence isn't avoidance, it's containment. That's the hidden superpower here. A man who can hold space for strong emotions without rushing to drown them in noise becomes a safe harbor. And in a world of constant chatter, that kind of quiet strength doesn't just stand out, it becomes the bedrock of real connection. So the next time you feel the itch to fill the silence, remember, the unspoken carries its own eloquence. What you don't say can resonate longer than what you do, because silence mastered isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of something far rarer. A man who's comfortable in the quiet is a man who's already at home with himself, and that, more than any words, is what lingers in the space between heartbeats. A well-dressed man walks into the room, not in head-to-toe logos or painfully on-trend pieces that'll look dated next season, but in a crisp white shirt, dark tailored trousers, and boots that have seen years of wear but still stand sturdy. No flash, no peacocking, just pieces chosen with purpose. That's fashion as function, the 21st trait women instantly notice in Stoic men. It's not about rejecting aesthetics, it's about aligning appearance with essence, where every item serves a role beyond decoration. The Stoic's wardrobe whispers a truth Seneca championed. Luxury is the obstacle, not the goal. Consider 2 approaches to style. One man chases every micro-trend, his closet overflowing with fast fashion destined for landfills, his identity shifting with each passing hype cycle. The other owns fewer pieces, but each is versatile, durable, and deliberately chosen: a wool overcoat that layers effortlessly, a watch that tells time without screaming for attention, shoes built to resolve rather than replace. Women spot this distinction immediately. The first man's clothes beg, "Look at me." The Stoics simply state, "Here I am." There's a quiet confidence in wearing what works, not what wows. This philosophy mirrors Stoicism's core tenet, indifference to externals. Just as the Stoic doesn't derive worth from others' opinions, he doesn't rely on labels to confer status. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of Rome, wore simple tunics rather than imperial garb when off duty, not as false humility, but because excess fabric couldn't make him wiser or kinder. Modern men channel this when they prioritize fabric quality over logos, comfort over constriction, and timelessness over temporariness. A woman observing this isn't just noticing his sweater, she's glimpsing his worldview. The man who dresses without anxiety about others' judgments is the same man who will stand firm in his values when pressured. Function-first fashion also signals resourcefulness, a trait hardwired into attraction. Early humans survived because of practical ingenuity, making tools from bone, shelters from hides. Today's equivalent, the man whose jacket transitions seamlessly from work meetings to weekend hikes, whose leather bag ages beautifully because he maintains it. These choices telegraph competence not just in attire but in life. Women interpret this subconsciously. If he takes this much care with his possessions, how might he care for a partner? The magic lies in intentionality. Stoic style isn't a uniform of drab monotony. It's a curated edit where each piece has purpose. Think of Diogenes, who owned a cup until he saw a child drink from his hands, then discarded it as superfluous. Modern minimalism isn't about deprivation but distillation. Perhaps it's a single well-crafted ring instead of gaudy knuckle dusters, or a signature scent that lingers subtly rather than announces his arrival. Women remember these touches because they're authentic extensions of personality, not borrowed from influencers. Practicality also breeds consistency, another silent signal women decode. The man who wears the same style of well-fitted jeans for years, just replacing them as needed, projects steadiness. Contrast that with the guy whose wardrobe reinvents itself monthly, chasing elusive approval. The Stoic's consistency isn't stagnant, it's anchored. Like his philosophy, his style evolves thoughtfully, not reactively. That predictability in appearance mirrors reliability in character. Ultimately, fashion as function isn't a rejection of aesthetics, it's their elevation. When a woman sees a man whose clothes fit impeccably because he knows his measurements, whose boots are polished but show honest wear, she isn't just seeing a put-together outfit. She's witnessing a man who respects resources, understands utility, and remains unshaken by the shifting sands of trends. And in a world drowning in disposable consumption, that kind of deliberate living doesn't just look good, it feels like a breath of fresh air. A man who speaks in declarations often misses the magic of discovery. There's a profound difference between telling someone how the world works and exploring it with them, the difference between certainty and curiosity. Picture two first dates. One man dominates the conversation with unsolicited opinions on politics, art, and economics, his tone leaving no room for dissent. The other leans in and asks, "What's a perspective you hold that most people don't understand?" Then listens like the answer might rewrite his understanding of the universe. That's intellectual humility in action, and women don't just appreciate it, they're disarmed by it. This isn't about pretending ignorance. It's about recognizing that no matter how much you know, there's always more to learn, especially from the person in front of you. Socrates, though not a Stoic himself, was a cornerstone of their philosophy precisely because he valued questions over answers. His famous admission, "I know that I know nothing," wasn't self-deprecation, it was the bedrock of wisdom. The Stoics embraced this, understanding that true growth begins when we release the need to be the smartest person in the room. Imagine a dinner debate about climate change. The certain man interrupts with statistics to win. The curious one asks what personal experience shaped your view on this, and suddenly the conversation isn't about scoring points, it's about uncovering layers. Women notice this shift instantly because curiosity doesn't just foster connection, it validates the other person's humanity. Here's where most men stumble. They confuse knowledge with intelligence and intelligence with worth. The result, lectures disguised as conversations. A Stoic avoids this trap by treating every interaction as a collaborative excavation. When she mentions loving modern art, he doesn't flex with a rant about Rothko's color fields. He might instead ask, what's a piece that moved you and why? That simple pivot does something remarkable. It trades ego for intimacy. Women interpret this not as a lack of confidence, but as its highest form, a man secure enough to not perform his intellect on demand. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating. Studies show that when someone feels truly heard, their brain releases oxytocin, the same bonding hormone triggered by physical touch. A curious question asked with genuine interest can create that chemical surge far faster than any monologue ever could. This is why the man who asks, "How did that make you feel?" after she shares a childhood story leaves a deeper imprint than the one who responds with his own anecdote. One centers her experience, the other reroutes it back to himself. Practical applications abound. Replace rhetorical assertions with open-ended inquiries. Swap "that's not how history happened" with "what sources shaped your take on that event." Trade "you're wrong about that artist" for what draws you to their work. This isn't about surrendering your views, it's about creating space for hers. The Stoic knows that the goal of dialogue isn't to conquer, but to connect. And when a woman encounters a man who seeks to understand rather than overpower, she doesn't just feel valued, she feels seen. The most compelling aspect of curiosity. It's contagious. A man comfortable saying, "I've never thought of it that way. Tell me more," invites her to drop her guard and engage authentically. Contrast that with the know-it-all whose rigidity forces her to either debate or disengage. Intellectual rigidity repels, intellectual humility attracts, because at its core, curiosity is a silent admission. You have something to teach me, and in a world where most men are too busy performing to listen, that admission isn't just refreshing, it's irresistible. The paradox, of course, is that the less a man insists on being right, the more credible he becomes. When he says, "I could be missing something, what's your read on this?" he doesn't lose authority, he gains trust. Women sense that this balanced confidence paired with openness is the hallmark of a mind that's strong enough to bend without breaking. And that kind of resilience doesn't just make for great conversation, it makes for a great partner. So the next time you're tempted to impress with your knowledge, consider instead the power of 3 simple words: "Help me understand." They might just be the key to unlocking something far deeper than debate, a connection that outlasts the conversation. True strength isn't ignoring someone's pain, it's standing beside it without being pulled under. This is emotional mirroring, the 23rd trait that makes Stoic men extraordinary. Imagine her venting about a brutal workday. One man either dismisses it, "just quit," or absorbs her frustration, his own mood souring instantly. The Stoic, he nods, meets her eyes and says, "That sounds exhausting. How can I support you?" His voice steady, his presence unwavering. That balance, acknowledging her storm without letting it flood his own shores, is the essence of Stoic empathy. Women don't just hear this response, they feel its weight, because trust isn't built by fixing or folding, it's built by holding space. The ancient Stoics practiced sympatheia, the recognition that all humans are connected like limbs of a single body. But here's their genius twist: connection doesn't require contagion. Picture a doctor treating a bleeding patient. Does he panic at the sight of blood? No, he stays calm precisely so he can help. The Stoic approaches emotions the same way. When she's anxious about an upcoming move, he doesn't drown in her worry. "Maybe we picked the wrong neighborhood." Instead, he reflects back the emotion while anchoring the conversation. I see how stressful this feels. Let's break it down. What's the first step we can tackle? That pivot from absorbing to guiding doesn't minimize her feelings. It transforms them from obstacles into waypoints. Modern psychology calls this emotional attunement. Studies show women subconsciously assess a partner's ability to regulate emotions, not just match them. A man who crumbles when she's upset or bulldozes her sadness with toxic positivity fails this test. The Stoic passes by mirroring with boundaries like a lake reflecting storm clouds without becoming the storm itself. Consider two responses to tears. One man stiffens, rushing to cheer her up with jokes. Another sits quietly, hands her a tissue, and murmurs, "This seems really important to you." The first tries to erase the emotion, the second honors it, and in doing so helps her process it faster. Practical applications are everywhere. Next time someone shares frustration, try this. Paraphrase their feeling. "You're feeling overwhelmed because the deadline moved up." Then add a grounding observation. "But you've handled curveballs before. What worked then?" This technique validate, then elevate prevents you from either dismissing the emotion or being hijacked by it. Women interpret this balance as maturity. Here's a man who can sit with my fire without getting burned. The brilliance of this trait, it's empathy without enmeshment. The Stoic doesn't abandon his emotional center to prove he cares. In fact, his stability is how he cares. Think of a lighthouse. It doesn't race into the roiling waves to understand the storm. It stands firm, offering direction precisely because it isn't swept away. When a woman encounters this kind of presence, someone who can reflect her feelings without absorbing them, she doesn't just feel heard, she feels safe. And in that safety, walls come down, intimacy deepens, and real connection begins. The ultimate paradox: by not collapsing under the weight of others' emotions, the Stoic becomes the strongest support of all. Because love isn't about losing yourself in someone else's storm. It's about being the unwavering ground beneath their feet when the winds howl, and that kind of strength. It doesn't just build trust, it becomes the foundation for everything that follows. A man planting an oak tree knows he may never sit in its shade, yet he digs anyway. That's long-term perspective in its purest form, honoring the future without mortgaging the present. Women recognize this balance instantly because it's the sweet spot between reckless spontaneity and joyless austerity. Think of two men discussing retirement. One shrugs, "I'll figure it out later," tossing another dollar into a lottery ticket. The other maxes his IRA contributions but still books that fishing trip he's dreamed about for years. One lives as if tomorrow doesn't exist, the other as if today doesn't matter. The Stoic, he does neither. He plans like he'll live forever, yet lives like he could die tomorrow, and that paradox is precisely what makes him magnetic. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Not to dwell on doom, but to prepare with clear eyes. Imagine a couple discussing homeownership. The impulsive man wants to buy the first charming bungalow they see, consequences be damned. The anxious one obsesses over interest rates until paralysis sets in. The Stoic, he runs the numbers, stresses tests their budget against job loss or illness, then, if it aligns, signs the papers with a toast to their future. That blend of pragmatism and presence reassures women on a primal level. Here's a man who can build a lifeboat without fixating on shipwrecks. Here's where most misunderstand long-term thinking. It's not about sacrificing all present joy for future security. Seneca warned against hoarding wealth only to die in the midst of accumulating it. The Stoic's version slices smarter. He saves steadily but still takes his mother to Italy while she can walk the cobblestones. He invests in index funds but also in Friday night dates that deepen connection. Women notice these choices because they reveal priorities. Preparation isn't about fear, it's about making room for more meaningful yeses down the road. Biological wiring explains part of the allure. Women, often the default planners in relationships, are subconsciously drawn to men who demonstrate foresight. a trait evolutionarily linked to stable providers. But the Stoic's edge lies in his why. He doesn't meal prep and lift weights to impress. He does it so his body can carry him through decades of adventure. He doesn't avoid reckless debt to appear responsible, but to preserve freedom. That intrinsic motivation changes everything. When a woman sees a man renovating his grandmother's old porch, not because it increases resale value, but because he wants her to enjoy one more summer there, she's glimpsing his heart through his foresight. The magic is in the daily manifestations. A Stoic's long-term view isn't locked in some distant future. It's lived now in micro-choices. He flosses not for next week's dentist visit, but for 60-year-old teeth that can still enjoy steak. He learns conflict resolution skills not just to salvage today's argument, but to nurture a marriage that outlasts infatuation. These small, steady investments compound into something irreplaceable: trust. When a woman observes this pattern, when she sees a man who can delay gratification without losing sight of joy, she doesn't just feel secure, she feels inspired. Yet the true test comes during life's curveballs. When illness strikes or markets crash, the man who's practiced premeditatio malorum doesn't panic, he adapts. His emergency fund isn't just money, it's peace of mind. His workout routine wasn't vanity, it's resilience. Women recognize this preparation as the ultimate form of care, not just for himself, but for those who'll rely on him. Because the oak tree he plants today isn't just for his shade, it's for everyone who comes after. And that kind of vision, it doesn't just build futures. It builds legacies. Death awareness isn't about morbidity, it's about intensity. Picture two men at a sunset. One scrolls mindlessly through his phone, barely glancing up. The other watches the light fade with quiet focus, as if committing every hue to memory. That's memento mori in action, the Stoic practice of remembering mortality to amplify presence. Women sense this immediacy instantly, because a man who lives with death in mind doesn't tiptoe through life, he strides, not recklessly but awake. There's a gravitational pull to someone who understands time's finite nature and refuses to waste it on pettiness or half-hearted commitments. The Stoics didn't shy from this truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now, not to incite fear but to sharpen focus." When a man internalizes that his days are numbered, not in some distant future but potentially tomorrow, his priorities crystallize. He stops postponing hard conversations. He invests in relationships that matter instead of draining ones out of obligation. He pursues work that resonates rather than clings to security blankets. This isn't desperation, it's clarity. And women recognize it as the ultimate form of confidence, a man who's unshackled from societal scripts because he's measuring his life against a starker metric: inevitability. Here's the paradox: embracing death doesn't dim passion, it ignites it. Most people assume the opposite, that fixating on mortality would breed nihilism or haste. But the Stoic discovers something counterintuitive instead. When he accepts that this kiss, this laugh, this quiet morning coffee could be his last, he doesn't panic. He savors. Imagine a man who, after a fight with his partner, doesn't retreat into days of sulking because he knows time lost can't be reclaimed. Or one who chases his vocation not as a someday dream, but with the urgency of someone aware that someday isn't promised. That's the magnetism of memento mori. It strips away pretense and leaves only what's real. Women respond to this on a primal level. Biology isn't subtle here. Females across species instinctively prefer mates who exhibit vitality, purpose, and engagement with life. A man who lives like he's alive, who doesn't postpone joy or shrink from depth, triggers that same ancient recognition. It's why the artist who paints daily despite rejections is more compelling than the one waiting for perfect conditions. Or why the widower who speaks of his late wife with tearful gratitude attracts more genuine connection than the bachelor boasting about his emotional detachment. Death awareness doesn't harden, it softens, melting away trivial concerns to reveal the raw beauty beneath. Practical applications are everywhere. Start small. Next time you're stuck in traffic, instead of clenching the wheel, consider, if this were my last commute, what would I notice? The way the light filters through the trees. The absurdity of road rage, that shift from frustration to presence, is the essence of Stoic death meditation. Apply it to relationships. Before reacting to a partner's criticism, pause. If this were our last conversation, would I want this to be my final response? Suddenly, ego shrinks, connection expands. The most profound impact, though, is on legacy. A man who lives with death in mind isn't obsessed with leaving monuments or amassing wealth to outlast him. He focuses on ripples, the kindnesses paid forward, the wisdom shared, the love nurtured. Women don't just witness this, they're drawn into its current. Because a partnership with a man who embraces impermanence isn't about building a life that lasts, it's about crafting one that matters. And in that distinction lies the ultimate allure, the quiet confidence of someone who's not afraid to live fully, precisely because he knows it won't last forever. This is the final, masterful trait, not because it overshadows the others, but because it underlies them all. A man who carries death lightly in his mind walks taller, loves deeper, and lingers longer over what counts. And that presence, rooted not in fear of ending, but in reverence for the moments before, it doesn't just capture attention, it etches itself into memory. Because the rarest thing in this world isn't perfection, it's aliveness, and nothing's more attractive than a man burning bright with the unshakable knowledge that flames by nature don't last, so he might as well blaze. What makes these 25 Stoic traits so powerful isn't just their individual impact, it's how they feed into a virtuous cycle, each one reinforcing the next. Emotional control builds the foundation for presence. Presence deepens listening. Listening fosters trust. Trust invites vulnerability, and vulnerability. It becomes the soil where genuine connection takes root. This isn't attraction built on manipulation or performance. It's magnetism forged in authenticity, the kind that doesn't just draw glances but holds gazes. The beauty of Stoicism is that it's a practice, not a persona. You don't need to master all these traits overnight. Start with one, whichever resonates most. Maybe it's learning to pause before reacting, or setting boundaries without apology, or simply letting silence breathe in conversations. Small shifts compound. A cold shower today might seem trivial, but the discomfort tolerance it builds could be the same grit that steadies you during a career setback or relationship challenge months from now. The Stoics knew this. Excellence is a habit, not an act, and here's the secret women won't always articulate. They don't want perfection, they want progression. A man working on himself, owning his flaws while striving to grow, is infinitely more compelling than one pretending he's already arrived. That's why these traits resonate so deeply. They're not about putting on a show, they're about embodying a way of being. When a woman senses your calm isn't an act, your confidence isn't a facade, and your integrity isn't situational, something primal clicks into place. She's not just attracted to you, she's reassured by you. So don't treat this as a checklist to rush through. Let it marinate. Reflect on which traits you've glimpsed in yourself already and which feel like uncharted territory. Then, in the comments, tell me this: which traits have you noticed women respond to most? Is it the quiet confidence of decisiveness, the warmth of non-competitive humor? Or maybe the depth that comes from selective vulnerability? Your observations might help others spot their own strengths or reveal blind spots worth polishing. Because at its core, Stoicism isn't about becoming someone else. It's about uncovering the best version of who you already are and letting that man step into the light. When he does, something remarkable happens. The right women won't just notice, they'll lean in. And that's when you'll realize the most powerful attraction isn't something you create. It's something you allow.